A little bit of shame can go a long way, but I'll explain that at the end. For now, let's make a jewelry box. For this project, I'm only using a couple bowl gouges and a parting tool. The blank is mounted between centers to turn round. The tool rest is set just close enough that the blank will spin clear. I start with a slow speed of about 650, but I had to turn it up to get a little less clunking. The bowl gouge bevel is parallel to the workpiece and drawn across the length in several passes. Even these cuts are clean compared to the carbide tool I would have normally used. Forgive the pun, but I figured a Burl ought to provide a good challenge to see if I can get a clean, tear-out-free cut, and boy does it work. So I don't blow out the cut at the end, I flipped around to come in from the other side. After turning the blank round and turning off the lathe, nice, clean, tear-out-free, and look, a small little occlusion. And here is my ever-so-fancy sharpening station. It retails for garage sale prices. Since this is a lidded box, I had to put a tenon on both ends. First, I would plunge across the grain for a couple passes, then reorient the tool to come along the end grain, similar to turning the blank round. It wasn't as square as I would have liked, but it removed material much faster than the parting tool I used to clean up. Next was using the parting tool to split the lid in the cup of the box. I kept the width about 1.5 times the width of the tool, and kept dipping the tool in water to cool off. I started a little bit of hollowing to get a feel for where the tenon of the cup of the box will go. This was raising above the bevel of the gouge until I started taking shavings and riding the bevel to the center. Once the hollow for the cup was established, I started removing material on the outside for the tenon. This time I started from the end grain instead of the plunge across the grain, and followed up with the cross grain cut for the shoulder of the tenon. Then a light pass to ensure the top was even. Hollowing the cup of the box started with creating a more defined inner wall of the tenon. With the defined wall, I would ride the bevel down the wall until I started taking shavings from the bottom, and roll the tip until supported by the bevel away from the wall, and ride it towards the center. At some point I noticed I was getting a lot of vibration and realized the jaws of the chuck needed some tightening. Once tightened up, it was smooth sailing down the wall of the box and sliding along the curved bottom. Little strands of shaving seemed to indicate I was doing something right. As I got deeper into the cup, to maintain riding the bevel down the wall, the tool was starting to near the far rim of the cup. A different grind angle on the tip could have changed that, but it would mean less support when rolling to follow the bottom and a narrower cutting edge. At this point there was no way at the bottom of the cup to support riding the bevel, so it was just light and careful passes. At the end, I took a final pass down the wall to make sure it was even. Then, followed up with a light pass along the bottom. Probably a bad habit since it can crush wood fibers, but dragging the heel of the tool helped clear the chips. Next, I chucked up the lid of the box to start hollowing the lid and I suppose it's called the mortise. I started closer to the edge than on the cup and started to create the hollow. And as if there was not enough evidence, I am human. Friends don't let friends turn distracted.
Pay attention, you imbecile.
At least it's a Burl, so no one expects perfect grain alignment. So let's clean up that mistake. Now we do a couple normal bowl type cuts. Find the shavings and ride the bevel down toward the center. Now I turn the gouge so the bevel is pointing along the grain again, and make a straight edge for the wall of the mortise. Next is the finicky turn, test to get a nice complementary fit. And this is a perfect fit, where it can hold itself there with friction, but a light tug can pull the cup off the lid. The dome inside the lid is cleaned up for a nice gradual curve. And to give the outside appearance of a perfect fit, the rim is slightly tapered inward. While I still have one tenon to work with on the outside of the box, I put the cup back on the box and bring up the tailstock. Now I do a final rounding pass to make sure everything is true again and make the walls slightly thinner. The friction fit isn't enough to allow me to cut off the tenon from the bottom, so I use some painter's tape along the joint. Now I turn the tool sideways and trim the tenon in a number of light passes. Once it's down to just a nib and not supported by the live center, I back the tailstock out of the way and trust the chuck to do its job. I put a very slight hollow on the bottom of the cup so the box will sit evenly when on a flat surface. Don't forget the little nib. Once the tape is removed, the lid is flipped around. The jaws are tightened gently so the mortise of the lid is not damaged. A series of light passes are taken so the lid doesn't get ripped off the lathe. Then a gentle curve is cut into the outside of the lid. I used a mineral oil and beeswax finish for the box. A heat gun was used to melt the finish in and around the occlusion I mentioned earlier. One of the comments on a previous video suggested I learn to use my tools correctly, and you know what? He was right. I've been a bit lazy with the lathe, content to just keep bumbling along in my ignorance. It's an honor that this fellow was concerned enough about my safety, and while the joy that turning can be when done effectively, and hopefully now correctly, then any hard feelings he might have stirred up. So I did a bunch of research and redoubled my efforts to learn to use a bowl gouge properly and practice making a number of these boxes. What a difference a little learning can make in changing your attitude about a tool. And hopefully this summer, Elizabeth and I will be taking some classes. Well, thanks for watching, and as always, God bless.